John Pryor, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Thank you for giving up your time to have a chat this morning.
Hi, welcome, mate. Afternoon for me, of course.
Absolutely, exactly. We've just got a little bit of light coming through the window here, so it's a pleasure to chat to you, mate. And looking the part in the facility, it's looking well.
Yeah, no, it's a great spot. It's quite a long story as to how I come to use it, as we discussed, but no, it's good. Yeah, it's a good little workspace.
Nice, mate. So you're working Rugby Australia with the Wallabies. Has rugby always been your sport?
So I've been with rugby now since about 1996, before you were born, mate. But
not quite. Well, thank you.
My dirty little secret is that I've actually never played rugby. I never saw a game until I was 26. Didn't know a halfback from a prop. But I love anything to do with running and everything to do with fighting. And I saw rugby league first, rugby league and rugby, and I just loved them. I got a job with rugby, the only club rugby here in Sydney, and I've pretty much been with rugby ever since. I grew up playing Aussie rules. The town I came from, and part of a very awful cold part of Australia, there's no rugby. We never even heard of rugby. You play Aussie rules if you're a bloke, and netball if you're a girl. Although back in those days, now it's different. Rugby's my game now, but I'm passionate about all running sports and all fighting sports, I guess, and I kind of see rugby as a combination of those with a lot of skill and tactics thrown in. Yeah.
So you ever been involved in any specific fighting sports?
Not really. I competed in track for quite a while, sort of decathlon and sprints and discus, and then when I studied my master's degree, I went up to northern New South Wales, and there was no track and field, so I took up kung fu and kickboxing and got into that for a few years, but not a great competitor or anything like that. Just a bit of fun, but it was very, very influential in my informing, part of my broader S&C philosophy. Look, as young as I can remember, I only cared about two things: was who was fast and who was tough, and I used to drive my brothers and sisters crazy, who's going to win if a crocodile fights a shark, and who's going to be faster out of a tuna fish and a leopard. And
they're the best. They're the best.
And I love distance, like people. I'm in power sports, and I've always worked in that area. But I love marathon, distance running, 10K, all the disciplines of running. So, those things kind of became useful, I guess, when I moved into rugby, because combat. Physical, combat skills and locomotive skills, be it agility or speed, have always been a passion. So, I kind of, good fit for me, really. I've done a little bit in the league, not as much in league, and I kind of like probably a lot about the mentality of league, sometimes more so than rugby. But I love them. I go back now and watch AFL, which I grew up with, and I have no interest in it at all. It's become quite. Game of fitness and very little physicality. So, I'm still here, 51 years of age. A long time later, I'm still in rugby and, still enjoying it.
Just out of interest, for someone that's never worked in rugby or rugby league, what's the difference in mentality?
Look, I think what's probably it's a bit of an oversimplification, but you're probably a private school, public school, working class, upper class. That's the history of it. And now it's a little different, but there's a long history to that. And I mean, if I go and work with a rugby league club and say we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that, right? Let's get into it. If I go to a rugby place, people want to know why and how far and how long, and is it going to be hard? And that's the history to it. It's definitely less so now, and I think, but definitely in Australia, one of our challenges is to get our training culture in rugby as tough as it is in rugby league. I think we're probably a bit, in some ways, a bit more sophisticated than training systems, but rugby league's got a toughness and also the nature of the game. It's a pretty simple game played by tough blokes. If you were to come into 3 rugby league clubs over here in Australia and 3 rugby union clubs, at the moment, at this point in time, the league clubs train harder and are tougher, and that's something that we've got to address in rugby, and we've got to catch up a little bit. We certainly have good level of training sophistication, but it's a tougher culture at the moment. If we could ban rugby league in Australia and pull all the rugby league talent back to rugby, I'm going to say we'd beat the All Blacks and all in sundry within 5 years, because our toughest guys and a lot of our good athletes are getting pulled to rugby league. The problem is we're the number 4 code, in Australia. So rugby union's a very small sport. I mean, when I grew up to the age of mid-20s, I didn't even have any awareness of it. It's below soccer, below AFL, below rugby league. So it's quite a small sport. So, you know, the Wallabies batted above you know, their natural position for a long time. Now we're down to number 7 in the world, and we got to work out how to make that, you know, bridge that gap and get back to where we want to be, the top couple.
In terms of culture and having that, then requests from how far, how high, what we're doing, that questioning that you mentioned on the rugby union side, is that good for your development as a coach, working in that kind of environment where players don't just say yes, let's go, they actually question what you're doing or not? Is that a frustration?
No, it's a good question. I think it is. Yeah, I think it is when you're younger, you know, because you've got to be able to answer those questions. But, you know, in SC, mate, there's times for talk and times for complicated explanation, and there's times when you've got to rip in. I like to make when I coach anyway, to have a really clear delineation of which sessions are about detail and finesse, and which sessions are just about grit and digging deep. And in those kind of sessions, I don't want to hear any questions of that nature. But I think in Australian rugby, we created a bit of a problem, right? And when it went professional, I think maybe 96 or thereabouts, you know, we started educating about overtraining and educating about, you know, stuff that they didn't need to know about. They just needed to train harder and develop tougher culture. So we're partly responsible for that sort of period where I think, rugby's kind of trained certainly at a level of intensity lower than league. The game's inherently more complex, you know, so but I think it's a good question. You got to be ready for those questions, but you've also, in some sessions, you've got to tell people to shut up and get to it.
Do you make that clear to the players on a programming level when they see the timetable? They know that this is I don't know how you term it, but like a hot session, that this is just get it done. This is going to be high intensity. This is not a time for messing around.
Absolutely.
And
so I mean, we'll come to this stuff later, but if I'm teaching some coordination stuff, which is largely influence of Frans Bosch and similar, then they will know that it's about detail and there's intensity to it, but it's not a metabolic intensity. It's force, speed, coordination. Whereas if if we're doing what we call contact conditioning and simple reload off deck kind of fitness, then that's obviously, there's not much detail there. It's about grit, intensity and effort. So I think as a coach, to make those things really clear is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So just diving into some of the people that have influenced you over the years. It was actually Warren that sent me your email address about getting you on to come on the podcast. Yeah, so Warren stitched you up, but he's been a big influence on your career. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how?
Yeah, look,
he has influenced your career?
I haven't really thought about that until recently, and even more so when you mentioned it. I grew up in Ballarat, which is about as shit cold place as you can get in Australia. It's a pretty ordinary place in central Victoria. I grew up as one of 10 kids there, and the local university was Ballarat University. So to be honest, I signed up for human movement, not thinking too much about it. Warren was a lecturer there. He probably was only in his mid-20s, late 20s. And this is 1988, long time ago. And strength conditioning, strength science was non-existent. And Warren was a lecturer there. So by my second year of undergraduate, he was doing, we had weight training, advanced weight training, biomechanics, mixed. That was all just Warren Young creating those units. I'm surprised he still talks to me, because he used to do advanced weight training on a Friday morning, and Thursday night was the big night in the university, free happy hour all night. So I used to rock up to his lectures with a hangover and absolutely give it to him, like just hit him with questions, because he's not the most confident bloke, so I could rattle him a fair bit. But I'm joking now, but in retrospect, it was ahead of its time what he was presenting. He was teaching us about the fundamentals of strength conditioning, about the fundamentals of strength science. I think he developed the RSI, Reactive Strength Index, Speed Bound Index. He brought Charles Poliquin to Ballarat. Charles Poliquin, who would have been late 20s at the time, big beefed up bloke with plenty of knowledge. I mean, that was cutting edge. I have no idea how he got into Ballarat because we weren't exactly a big university. But when I look back at it, mainly, when you sent your notes through, Warren was very influential because at that time, I don't think there was anyone else, certainly not an undergraduate, talking about, strength diagnosis, strength assessment, all that kind of stuff. And Warren was teaching us that in undergraduate, which was great. And I was always active. I was, I didn't have any fucking clue about, excuse my language, about anything, but I was coaching shot putters, hammer throwers and Highland Games throwers, simply because I had a book on strength training and no one else in Ballarat did. And and using Warren's knowledge. I was, coaching on the back of his information at a very young age. And he was great. Don't know that I've ever actually thanked him really, but he was, running stuff that was way ahead of its time. He invented a squat protocol, which was basically a force plate. You'd be in a Smith machine. It was isometric, so the Smith machine's locked in place, and you're going to jam yourself up against that bar, and then force plate obviously is measuring RFD, max strength, all that kind of stuff. It was fantastic in theory because you think you've got a force curve, you got initial RFD, max RFD, you got time to 300 newtons, time to 1,000 newtons, max isometric strength. But if you think about it, I used to call it an IQ test because what sort of bloke's going to jam himself into an immovable object as fast as he can? So a couple of back injuries later, Warren adjusted it to using a dynamic. But he was a pioneer really. So I was lucky to run into him and to run into that. And at the same time, I had a mate affectionately known as Stumpy, who was a decathlete. So while I was learning from Warren, I was learning the disciplines of track and field from this guy. And you grow up in a provincial town like that in Australia. We didn't have the resources. There was no YouTube, no Twitter, no internet. So we were just getting old books, and certainly Warren was, by far the most informative source in those times.
Next question, nothing to do with Warren, but you were one of 10 kids, did you say?
Yeah, one of 10, and five of each, and I was at the bottom of the barrel. So I was always looking for ways to beat my brothers up, and I bought a dumbbell set and a speed ball and a punching bag when I was about 14, and set 2 training to try and get my older brother. I think if you're from a big family and you're at the bottom of the system, it's a natural thing to to want to get better and want to physically compete. And it was great. It was a great upbringing. So we were in Ballarat, but also had our farming property was just outside Ballarat. So it was pretty lively upbringing, I guess you'd say.
Nice. So the influence of Warren, and I like to ask this question for people that have been, no disrespect, people have been around a little bit longer than the average age of a strength and conditioning coach. What's changed? What's changed over that time period of you being in the industry from, did you say 1988 that you were doing the undergrad? So
I did undergrad 88 to 90, and then I started my postgrad 92 to 94. A lot's changed. I think, for us old guys, definitely, I hate it when old guys just say, everything was good in my day and it's shit in your day. I actually think it's the opposite for me. We certainly had to work hard to get information. So, I had to go to the library and I found a book on running by Percy Cerity, which was published in 1956, which still informs a lot of my philosophies of training now, but we had to seek information. And it was a bit of luck what individuals you ran into. I wrote some notes out to answer some of your questions, and when I look at it now, I was pretty lucky to run into Warren at that early stage. I think you guys, you younger fellas, you have the opposite. I feel sorry for you actually, because you jump on Twitter and you got so many and some good ones. Jonas Dodo, good experts. Then you got these other guys, and you have such a plethora of information available to you. So. And when I speak to young guys like yourself and younger, you're familiar with so many different people's names and topics and experts on training load and velocity-based training. But I think the challenge for you guys is working out which ones you need and what kind of coach you want to become. Because otherwise you can just be in words only, familiar with all these topics, but actually working out which ones you need to advance your cause as an individual coach. I think that's the challenge for you guys with so much information. I mean, I'm a laid back guy. I'm not a stress cat, but I the one thing that does stress me is I'm sitting down, just kind of unwinding at the end of the day, and then if I leave Twitter on, and I see this research by what's the Frenchman, JB Moran, and then it keeps popping up and it keeps popping up. I think, I should read that. I should read that. And that does stress me. Not many things do. And so I just kind of, I've made a conscious decision in the last few years to really minimise even your own great podcast. I'm very judicious with what I select to listen to now, because at the age I'm at now, I've defined what kind of coach I want to be. And I think if I had any advice for the younger SCs, it's, do a little bit of a self-analysis. What are your traits? What are your qualities? What are your things that you could become really good at? Because it's also harder for you guys, because when you get your first job, you're expected to be able to handle the GPS. You're expected to be able to do, load management systems. That's the main difference. Is that and also there's more of you applying. Well, if I advertise a job now, I've got 30 of you guys for a low-level job, and it's tough. So I reckon the younger SCs, work hard to have a point of difference, because those point of difference are hard to come by. For me, I kind of realised early on that I was an energetic sort of person, and that energy and intensity were part of my, modus operandi, I guess. And I've developed a style of coaching and found individuals to help me. Intensity and specificity are my go-to things as a coach. So, I need to do whatever I need to do to be, energetic and lively when I'm coaching. And then specificity means I've got to go and find the individuals to make sure my training content is highly specific. So that's why I've chased down the Gambettas and the Bosches and people like that. So I reckon as a young SC, try and work out what kind of coach you could be, what your point of differences might be. Because I think you guys have got it much harder than us, actually, rather than the other way around.
When I spoke to Aaron Coots,
and thanks for not calling me an old bastard, but he said yeah.
No, absolutely not. When I spoke to Aaron Coots, he mentioned about developing, and he was talking about a similar topic for younger coaches, developing a solid bullshit filter. And I think that's more important than ever, because all this information is getting thrown from every single direction. And I think, and this is from my personal reflection, probably 6 or 7 years ago, got very, very overwhelmed with the amount of information that was there, and going, hell, it looks like everyone knows all this stuff coming from all these different directions. Obviously, everyone projects their best self on Twitter or Instagram.
It's easy, mate. Even in this interview now, I can act like an expert, and you're not seeing my training. You can't actually double check on it, so I can crap on. So I thought when you're listening to an expert, and there are good ones, there are good ones about, but how do they know what they know? How long have they been doing what they've been doing, and what's the evidence of their success? And also, I just think, I'm pretty sure I was born with a really good bullshit detector, and I just. Really cautious and judicious with whose information I take on board. And even if that information, I may have done my homework and found out, what's the guys, Altus, a couple of guys at Altus, some pretty good individuals. They're using some methodologies that I'm just not familiar enough with it. I haven't put enough time into it. I haven't been there coaching with them. So I'm just not going to use it, because I've developed my own, system as far as the team sports environment is concerned. So I think being really judicious with what you invest in. So I listen to your podcast a lot, but I'll listen to it while I'm driving or doing something else. And if I stumble upon an individual who, then I'm going to go back to it and listen to it properly. Then I'm going to chase that guy. Then I might make contact and offer a trade or whatever. But this idea, I run into a lot of young SCs, and the idea, if I say, do you know about this guy's velocity-based strength systems? And they go, yeah, I know that. You know about Frans Bosch? Yeah, I know that. So they have in word understanding of everything, but in terms of being able to execute it in your training environment, it's another game altogether. So it's the toughest challenge, I think, for young SCs.
Just one last question on this, JP. I'd like to get your opinion. point of difference, developing a point of difference for a younger coach.
Yeah.
What are the points of difference that you see that are attractive to you as a senior strength and conditioning coach, and therefore as part of an employer, because you're making a decision on who comes into your organization? What are the points of difference that are really key to you now, and how has that developed over time? Because things are obviously changing rapidly with the amount of data that people are generating and therefore having to analyze and interpret and all that kind of stuff. But what point of difference would attract you to a strength and conditioning coach?
A specific skill set. So if you had a young guy, I work at Suntory in Japan, which I've been with them, crikey, since 2008. Young English SC, Ben Eisen something, good young fella. He can handle GPS. He's good, solid strength and so forth. And I just said to him, and he likes doing a bit of jiu-jitsu and wrestling. I said, well, I can go away and make that strength, so I can have you take contact conditioning sessions, so that as a head of performance, I'm not a head of performance, I'm actually a consultant. I go in and out, but as a head of performance, if you can take something like that, or you might have a bit of a background in yoga and flexibility, and I know that you can handle your GPS, you can pick up cones like we all can do, and you can handle other stuff, but you're really red hot on flexibility and mobility, and you can take a recovery session. Because I think authenticity is it's self-evident. If I send the guys to you for a flex session and you're looking down at the sheet every 5 minutes and okay, here's the next one. If you've really put time into it, and if you really, I'm not talking about being an expert as in elite yourself, but if you've invested time, if you've invested and you therefore know the intricate details of that content, then that's a point of difference. It might be flexibility, it might be speed, might be speed tech, might be wrestle combat stuff. I think in football, I think running efficiency, coordination stuff. I think in football is a massive area to be exploited. I know a few guys are starting to drift into that space. GPS. I mean, those things are specializations, but shit, every bloke just about can do that nowadays. And I think you probably wouldn't get a job unless you can do those essential things.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe nutrition as well.
Has become essential. Yeah.
We've got a young. Well, no, he's not young anymore. He's probably mid-30s with the Wallabies. Warwick Carrington, very intelligent. He handles GPS. He does some really, really interesting analyses because he's an analyst background, but he happens to used to have been a kickboxer and a bloody good one. And he grappled a bit as well. So in the Wallaby environment, there's a guy with a significant point of difference. I can send guys to him for combat conditioning, and there's no question as to his authenticity. He's invested time in that. We can't all be that. We can't all be speed guys and tough guys, but there are lots of little areas in there out there, inclusive of nutrition. And I personally would rather my nutritional advice coming from a man or woman who lifts weights, who's invested time, rather than having a nutritionist come in who's stick thin and only ever starved themselves to be 50 kilos and and is just going to read the same text to each player. So, specialisation, and it's probably a bit rude, but I really think that point of difference is a big thing. I remember when we'll come to it later, but I've worked for Eddie Jones for 9 years across my last 20, and he sent me to see a guy by the name of Neil Craig, who I think's now he's now with England Rugby. At the time, he was the head of Adelaide Crows, AFL. He was a top sports scientist who became a coach. Anyway, I went to meet him, and he's like, who the fuck are you? What are you good at? What's your training environment like? And I kind of sat back on my seat, and he goes, and before you answer, if I ring 10 players, will they back you up and say the same thing as you? Made me realise two things. One is that, you've got to define for yourself what kind of coach you are, what your training environment's like, and what specialist skills that you think you've got, because you can't be everything. S&C's moved on so much. In when I started, you would do everything, and if you had a specific skill set, that's great. But I think much more difficult now. But I still think those points of difference will probably get you over the line, because when I'm looking at 30 CVs, a lot of them look the same.
It's interesting. I've just written down their hobby, because it seems that those point of differences can be, like you say, the authenticity of something that someone's taken up on their own off their own back, maybe something they've done as a child that's come through and the thread running through their life, whether that be jiu-jitsu, whether it be like sprinting, used to be an ex-sprinter, used to be an ex-rugby player at a decent level, all these kind of things. People can't really forget them threads that run through their life, because those can be the points of difference. Whether you were an age grade rugby player and you were decent, you were looking for an S&C coach job in rugby, like having that playing experience that you may disregard. Those are the things that can be, like you say, the point of difference that get you the job and keep you in the job, and are really, you're drafted in for those specific, because you've got that specific knowledge and experience that maybe the staff don't have.
Yeah,
so
I think it doesn't only apply to
really
the practical.
bear in mind.
It also applies to, to bodies of knowledge. A body of knowledge. But I'm not talking about just reading a Twitter feed and one paper. If you want to invest in a body of knowledge, then really invest in it. And I think that kind of authenticity, to me, it shows through. Yeah, so it's hard, isn't it? It's a hard thing to do.
It is. So you mentioned Vern Gambetta. What influence has his work had on you?
So I'll take a step back from that. I mean, when I finished my master's degree, which I was lucky to run into Greg Wilson, Wob Newton, and a guy called Mark Fisher, who runs Swift. They were all at Southern Cross Uni. So I actually finished that. And then I got a national funded PhD in industrial ergonomics. So I was actually going down industrial ergonomics because it looked like a safer career path. So I was 2 years into a PhD and was going to be an industrial ergonomist. I happened, as in Australia, I do anyway, go on long road trips for 10 or 20 hours from north to south, and I was driving from Ballarat to Byron Bay. A mate of mine called up and said, he was in Canberra and at a coaching conference, track and field coaching conference. He said he could sneak me in the back and I'll come and have a listen to this day two. I got there and there was a bloke named Kelvin Giles presenting. You've obviously heard of Kelvin Giles, yes. I hope. So that Kelvin Giles, I don't think he wouldn't even know this story, but he would have been at his peak then. He would have been in his 40s, big, wiry, muscular bloke, and he was taking a conditioning session for track athletes, and he was schooling them. And big, loud, strong character, and I just looked at that and thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so at that, and I also felt, I'm not the same as him. I'm not as big and strong or as loud as he was, but I felt like I could do that. And so I then kind of made the shift at that time and looked for anything I could get. Lucky enough to get a job, New South Wales Department of Sport at the Sydney Academy of Sport, and that was my point of entry. So he was probably the first bloke that I saw that made me think, I want to be an S&C coach. I haven't had much to do with Kelvin, so I'm not pissing in his pocket, to be nice. I haven't worked for him or with him at any club ever, but I just thought he was the Ducks nuts when I was, when I was at that age. And so then I sort of was actively seeking S&C. I was lucky in that at Southern Cross University, when I did my master's, there was, Rob Newton, who's probably pretty well known now, to Edith Cowan and Greg Wilson and these guys. I mean, I don't think I've ever saw Rob lift more than a 10-kilo dumbbell, but he's a bloody sharp researcher. And not only that, he was a computer programmer. So he instrumented this Smith machine called the Plyometric power system, which had electromagnetic brakes on it. We had a force plate below it. We could switch this brake on and put 300 kilos on it, stand under it, and then we'd flick the switch and it would squash you into the force plate. So that was my master's degree. Oh, wow. There's no way I'll be allowed to do it now, but he actually engineered all this technology. So that was a fantastic learning experience. I did my research on eccentric, isometric, and concentric RFD in that squat protocol, upper and lower body, and then related that to athletic performance. So the good and the bad. The good was it was really got me down that path of strength science. The bad, that it was really kind of rectilinear thinking in terms of my comprehension of force was all vertical force, horizontal, simple kind of stuff. When I got to the Academy of Sport, I was, a sports analyst. And then I was also coaching a squad of sprinters, and they were super strong. I got people really strong. We had RFDs good, VJs good, power for days, Bulgarian 140 squat. But when they were running, they're just, I call them rectilinear robots. They're just going. So I had guys running super strong, run 10.6s, couldn't get them faster. I had 400 metre runners who could run 300 repeats in the same time, but I kind of just had a gut feeling that I was good at developing, traditional strength qualities, RSI, your VJ, all those parameters. But I had a gut feeling that I didn't really, there were coordination elements I was missing. And so I started seeking an individual who might know, who might sort of be in that space. And that's kind of when I found Vern Gambetta, not found in person, just found his books. And I just read everything I could get, which wasn't much at the time, and got these crappy old VHS videos of, the Gambetta method. And I mean, that if you watch them, and I think Hammer Media, Big Martin, post some of Vern's old clips now, which are quite fun to watch. It was, I just looked at it, I thought it was fantastic. So I wrote him a couple of letters, not emails. There was no email, or the email might have been just starting about then. Wrote him a couple of letters. I went around to my boss and everyone I could get and cobbled together. I think I even contacted Lachlan Penfold, who was at Queensland, and we might have got $1,000 together. And I said, listen, can you come to Sydney? And I got Vern Gambetta out to Sydney, and I mean, I drove to the airport, picked him up, got the best accommodation on the beach I could get without much money, but did everything I possibly could to make him feel welcome and happy. And that was a big change. I mean, before all the complexity that I've learned with Frans, Vern was preaching the movement before muscles. He was preaching the mantra of coordination, not exclusive from strength, but preaching the mantra of, be considerate of coordination and strength and the best match possible. That was pretty, groundbreaking at the time. And I think there was a lot of people in the NSCA who hated his guts, because he was preaching something very different from squat and clean, and it'll take care of everything you need. So he was my first mentor, really. Well, I guess retrospectively, Warren Young was certainly one, but Vern was fantastic. And, from the back of meeting Vern, I think I brought him out to Australia 3 times. Then he introduced me to, Jimmy Radcliffe's work. And I remember the first time I had my track athletes, and I took Vern to a session and put these guys through a session, and he just sort of shaking his head, and he said, man, you guys have got no rhythm, you got no coordination, they look like robots. And he was complimentary also, because we were quite advanced in terms of, we had starting blocks instrumented with force pads. So we actually had total impulse and exit velocities. We had vertical speed strength systems, had invented the speed bound index with Warren Young, all this kind of stuff. But in terms of, rhythm, coordination, finer details of, what the pelvis is doing, where energy might be being lost through inefficiency, I didn't know any of that. And Vern kind of got me started on that. And forever grateful.
You've mentioned the speed band index twice now, and I haven't picked up on it to ask you a little bit more detail on it. Would you mind just going into a bit more detail on what it is?
Yep. So if you think about, whether you're a footballer, as in soccer football, or rugby player, or a track sprinter, I mean, bounding has been around for a long time. So 10 bounds for distance, so a good guy's going to get 30 metres plus, so et cetera, et cetera. We looked at that, and obviously it's a specific power metric, but because of the fact that you're trying to optimise distance in every step, you'll be overstriding, you'll be hitting your foot a long way out in front of the centre of gravity. It can be big braking forces. So from a coordination point of view, you can argue that it's either detrimental or non-specific. If you go to speed bound index, so then we mark out that 30 metres. Now I'm going to measure your number of strides, but I'm also going to measure the time it takes to get there. So going back to my squad guys, if they're in good shape, they're going to get there in 12 bounds and 4 point something seconds. So 4 times 12 is 48. There's your score. If I put you on it, you're going to take 15 bounds and take 6 seconds. That gives you a score of 60, and that's shit. That kind of thing. So you might be good, I might be getting it wrong. So what happens is...
you're correct.
What you end up seeing is... much more specific sprint positions. Your foot's a little more active pre-contact. So the distance is not quite as long, speed's higher, so the chances of it having a positive influence on your sprint performance are, much greater. I mean, Frans and I have had a few arguments over the years because he still thinks there's a non-specificity because you're still trying to optimise that stride length, swing leg retraction and foot contact pre-ground is he would still have some argument, but Dean Benton, who you may know of, and myself, and I'm sure a number of other people have used it with good effect for many, many years, particularly in our rugby environment. So we'll have I don't know if you can see the soft mats in here, but we'll have these soft mats in our gym, and 20 metres or 30 metres marked out, timing gates set up, and we do a stride count time, and the Swift system that Mark Fisher created used to auto-calculate the SBI and find that really useful. But I'm pretty sure Warren invented that, and I think I'm certain he did, and I know the original reactive strength index, I'm pretty certain, came from his work. So a lot of that diagnostic stuff, used that all the way through my career. I probably have more of a preference for the horizontal stuff now than the vertical, but they were really, really useful.
So would that be from a standing start?
Yep, it has to be standing start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, it's easy to use. And again, I mean, you said you're a shit runner and whatever, but it doesn't. If you're young and your body's still able, go and do it yourself. Any of this stuff, and if you want to, we'll get to the Bosch later. But while you're young and able, I never underestimate the value in experimenting this stuff with your own body before you go to your athletes. Just do it in a quiet place where no one's going to see you, and you won't embarrass yourself. But crikey, I've beaten my body to shreds playing with all these bound indexes and, drop jumps from 30 centimetres, from a metre, 1.5 metres, whatever, while you can use your body to experiment. I think, I like a blend of metrics, for strength, for the in-between, power and pliers, and then when it comes to the coordination content, that's where you need your eye. That's where you need to train your eye, because you have very few metrics there.
You mentioned coordination a couple of times, and I think there's a bit of a misconception when people say training coordination, movement coordination. What does that mean to you, and what did you take away? What were the big takeaways that you got from that Vern visit when he was saying, obviously, complementary stuff as well, but he was saying these guys, you've got some work to do.
Yeah, so it's a good question.
What were the big things that you took away and thought?
I think if we just look at these were sprinters, right? From 100 to 400, one 400-metre hurdler. And I was doing they were strong, seriously strong for that time. But the volume and intensity of work I was doing in the gym was leaving such residual fatigue around the pelvis that, a good runner, if you watch a good sprinter and the foot comes down, this hip's bang up like that, they were just so tight around the pelvis is barely moving. So there's certainly no, sagittal plane movement. And they were just, I think what Vern called them rectilinear robots or something like that, So he came out with his music speakers and played some salsa because he lives in Miami and wanted them to do karaoke dancing and just to get their hips moving properly. And I thought he was an idiot on day one, but he eventually convinced me. And so, for example, all of anything we did for core strength was always static and high load. So, just getting into Gambetta's walk and chop and three-dimensional abdominal kind of work. He was talking about that. This is 96, and I didn't really understand, but I could see straight away that there were big gaps in my approach, which was very much based in, vertical speed strength assessment. Looking at, I was still doing some pretty good stuff. Like we had, indoor timing gates with instrumented blocks, but I just didn't have any comprehension of the role of the abdominals, the role of, hip lock, pelvic control. And Vern introduced that broader idea of, how to fill in those gaps. Because I was pretty comfortable, I was and still am into some Olympic lifting variants and traditional strength. And I think I'm often perceived as a functional coordination guy. I mean, I love my strength and certainly did at that time. But I think Vern really was the first one to show me that it wasn't the complete picture, that I had some very strong people running very inefficiently.
Do you think there's plenty of people still out there who are stuck in that first JP head with it all been about strength and...
of course there are. Of course there are. And it's tempting, isn't it? Because it's when you come from that NSCA... now everything's modernised and they're obviously much more sophisticated than they were. But it was very, very tempting to say, well, you've just got to get your squat up from 160 to 220 and you're going to accelerate better. You just got to get your RSI from 210 to 300 and your top speed's going to be better. That was my mindset, and that was quite sophisticated from a strength point of view, but it just overlooked, the mechanisms of force transfer, where energy can be lost when the foot hits the ground, all those kind of things. So, I'm sympathetic to people who are stuck in that mode. And there's the opposite. There's the people who are doing wimpy little physio exercises with no intensity, and sorry to physios because there's, doing low-level stuff and with insufficient intensity. So you can get caught at either end. And I've been on both. I've been on that buffhead, think I can muscle the way out of every problem. And I've also gone sometimes too far down the coordination path where it's not accountable in the sense that I need to have a way to be sure that there's intensity in that work and that I've got a reasonably good grounds to think that I'll get transfer from it. Of course there are people who are still like that, and it's the former is probably more prevalent as in strength people, and particularly in the States, I think, because it's fundamentally easier to comprehend. If you want to go the opposite and go down the coordination path, it's a big investment in your learning, but an even bigger investment in training your eye to be able to manage it, conduct it, and qualitatively make sure it's most likely to have a training transfer, because we're all chasing it, of course.
I think that's the key, the qualitative aspect of it. And just having the confidence to be able to go down that route and not have it a number on a sheet, which is easy, like a number on a sheet.
That's what
it's comfortable.
John, honestly, mate, it's like pulling your pants down, because you're naked. You then say, okay, well, I'm going to drop my bench, I'm going to drop my squat and drop all these numbers, and I'm going to invest in this stuff. But how do I know if it's going to bring me a result? How do I know if I'm teaching it right? It's very confronting, and I think that's why a lot of people react. What is this bullshit? And I understand. It's often people, and it's not just the Bosch methods, but there are other people who are pushed down that path, and it's inherently more complex. It's inherently a little bit more difficult to understand, and it's not easy.
And we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. But just before we do get onto that, Eddie Jones, you've mentioned him. He came on in episode 300 with John Clark, which was great. It was absolutely brilliant. I wasn't confident in getting him on, but I know John for quite a while, JC.
Oh, okay.
And he was kind enough to put a word in, and we made it happen. So it was absolutely brilliant.
Well, if JC does another 7 years, he can talk to me. I'm the world record holder. I've done 9 years with Eddie. Fantastic. For me, Eddie treats an SC coach like one of his senior coaches. So he doesn't see, often we get confused ourselves. We're part scientist, we're part analyst. Eddie sees us as a core coach in the coaching environment, and therefore he expects us to get results, and he puts a lot of pressure on, but he's bloody good. He really values the contribution of strength and conditioning particularly to rugby, because I think it's one of the games where your physical capabilities and your method of playing are inextricably interrelated. But Eddie gets that. He was a 70-kilo hooker who had to eat everything in front of his, everything he could to be able to play the game and lift weights, So he understands it, and for me, it was a great experience, but demanding. He would, our main time together was in Japan, Suntory for 3 or 4 years, and then the national team for 4 years. And, he'd say, I want more muscle, mate. And I want them running faster, and I want them the fittest. So I had to try and, satisfying Eddie's wish list was tough. And that's where I probably, had to deviate away from any one expert, but try and find a system to provide what he wanted. So, for example, we had to put 5 kilos on per player over a 2-year period, and increase speed and agility, and increase endurance, and increase, really dynamic small space catch pass. If you're a smaller team, you have to be better at small space agility. So it was great to work for Eddie because he's bloody really supportive of SC in the first place. It's high pressure. It's not for everybody. But it was, for me, the fact that Eddie demanded such results, but then backed you up and gave you the resources to do it. Yeah, it was, fantastic. My years in Japan were best years of my life, and certainly I think, professionally the best years of my life. And the third part of that was that the Japanese blokes, mate, they just do everything you put in front of them. I never had a bloke say this is too hard. I mean, they would faint, and literally I hospitalised a few blokes who wouldn't have even dared to say, JP son, can I stop now? Like, they wouldn't even ask. So we had Eddie. Eddie's, if you want to meet a completely committed coach, that's what it looks like. That's what he is. So he demanded that from me, and I probably, got to a level of knowledge and performance that there's no way I would have without his influence. So it was fantastic.
Was it that space in between the S&C and the coaching, that space that you lived in and Eddie demands that you live in? Was that the push?
That's where I started. I mean, my main skill set going to Japan was, I'm a pretty robust character, so I'm quite good at putting intensity into training. I definitely had a skill set in linear speed, and I'm pretty comfortable with boxing and wrestling and that kind of stuff. But if a winger was flying down the wing and dropped a ball because he was at speed and had to catch it there, Eddie blames me.
Right.
So then I had to look into, thoracic range, thoracic speed, mobility. Then if a little halfback hasn't got the agility that he should have, Eddie's going to not blame me, but he would say, well, what can you do about that, JP? Why haven't you fixed that? Why has this bloke still got small arms? Whatever. But certainly the coordination one, and Eddie had a battle plan for the Japan team for the 2015 World Cup 2 years out, and his battle plan was, samurai eyes, ninja body, meaning that we were always going to be a smaller team, but he wanted really sharp, intelligent players, but had to be able to move quicker. So if you're a big bloke, Rob, and I'm a small bloke and I'm carrying the ball to you, I don't want to carry it straight and predictable because you're going to skewer me. So we had this idea of vertical speed and lateral speed very late, and I didn't really know much about agility and that type of coordination. So that's when I went and chased Frans Bosch, and I actually brought him to Japan. We went to a camp in the mountains of Sugadara, which was our spiritual home. We used to flog guys up there. Some crazy stuff. But anyway, I gave Frans 2 weeks because I didn't want to bring him in and say, just you should do this or you should do that. I just said, okay, you got 4 blocks of an hour across a week, AM sessions at 5 a.m. Do what you want. But this is what I want. And within 2 weeks, I was seeing changes in the GPS, mainly in peak accelerations and number of those peak accelerations. Now, this is not coming from SC content. It's coming from the native rugby sessions that Eddie does, but by the influence of the little pre-activations and coordination work that Frans have been taking. So now that's not the first time I'd ever heard of him. Dean Benton and I invited him. Actually, it was Dean. Dean read the book, the original book at Bosch and Klomp, and Dino said, well, let's get him out to Australia. And I think Dino funded it through the Broncos. Got him over there. He gave a lecture in Australia. He could have been speaking ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics or, Arabic. I wouldn't have known the difference. It was really confusing.
I'm sure there's plenty of people who feel the same.
No, so I didn't understand anything, but I did know that there was something in there that I didn't have. So that this was probably almost a 4-year gap. So I think I then, I brought him to Japan, just gave him free rein because it's a really bad idea to get an expert in and then lock them down, to constrain them. So I let him do whatever, and it was crazy. It was all kinds of movements and exercises I'd never seen. But I did see a shift in some individuals, even in that short window. So then that was when I thought, well, I got to invest in this. So I started, again, experimenting with my own body, learning what I could from him. We started corresponding. And then I brought him over the good thing about Japan is you have long off seasons. In the club comp, you'll have an 8-month off season or 7 months off season. So you can really, the SC coaches, if you can't get a result, then you're useless because you've got these big periods. So with the national team, we had only one advantage over other countries, and that was we had a longer period pre-World Cup because we had 5 months because we'd play in the Asian 5 nations and then have, so it was a 5-month torture camp, and I had Frans there for the first 2 months. It was, mate. It was we trained at 5 a.m. 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And I know no rugby team's ever done that in history, probably never will do. It was a combination of craziness and Eddie's inspiration and many other things. But as far as Frans was concerned, so I just coached with him side by side on some stuff, and then kind of observed, learned. If I couldn't understand it, I'd zip back to the gym and play around with it myself, and slowly built my skill set. And then he took off. It was either 6 or 8 weeks, and then I had another three or 4 months to go. And it was a very small staff. I was head of performance. I was also speed coach, strength coach, GPS. I had a lot of cone shifters, but not many. I had a very, very good Japanese strength coach, Hiroaki Nitta, he was an excellent strength coach. So, I had to do the rehab and I had to carry on what I'd learned from Frans for that whole prep. And that's when I really kind of got a feel for what he's teaching, and it just added the level of detail around coordination that I didn't have before. So if we would go to agility, for example, I would previously have just gotten my explosive, qualities as high as possible. So your VJs or your horizontal and vertical speed strength, and then I would create little change of direction drills, and you get a result with that. And I really recommend that if that's the stuff you know well and you're comfortable with, get into it and do it with intensity. But what Frans offers beyond that is a level of detail, and specificity around coordination. So, your attractors of agility, foot plant from above, swing leg retraction. I look at upper body first, chest out, all this kind of stuff that affects the way the body's transferred, the way force is transferred during running, and particularly agility. I could apply that much more scientifically. And so then, in his terminology, he would call them prefabs, or I call them building blocks. So, for example, I work out which ones I'm going to put in the gym and which ones I'm going to put on the field. So, a lot of guys, when they're accelerating, if you video your players accelerating, ankle stiffness in start and acceleration is often very, very poor. So rather than trying to coach all that when I'm out on the field doing agility exercises, I would say I look at certain prefabs that I use in the gym. So ankle stiffness for start and acceleration, the role of the abdominals in agility, which I previously hadn't really considered. I learned that very much from him and said, okay, well, these ones need to go in the gym. So I do these prefabs in the gym. And when I go out on the field, I'm going to zero in on more specific qualities. So I do my acceleration, so I would go, Eddie and I will work together. So the prefabs are done in the gym, and then we might do some bounding in the gym. Then we go out on the field and I'll do some COD races or some acceleration races. Then we might have some more complex, stuff. And then they go to 1v1, because you've got to eventually, if you're going to do agility, it's got to become open. We go to 1v1 agility, then 2v2, then Eddie would take over and it would be fully game specific. If it's backs, it might be 7-on-7 or 5-on-5. But the influence of Frans was that I could just be much more scientific about how I assembled that stuff. And rather than trying to coach everything while we're doing an agility session on the field, it allowed me to break it down, into prefabs, or I call them building blocks. I know that I would not have learned that if I hadn't been exposed to him. I could have ruminated and thought endlessly, and I would never have come up with that structure. Having said that, if you ask me about the influence of Bosch, and I had to put a value on, my first value of it is injury soft tissue reduction. I don't want to jinx myself, but I've had very, very good soft tissue stats now across 3 countries and 3 or 4 programs, deploying Frans's prefabs and using that stuff, not to the exclusion of strength. I mean, my athletes will always be strong. I'm a closet meathead myself, just a bit old and scrawny these days, but not to the exclusion of strength, but complementing my strength. So, for example, in my 60-minute strength session, I will always attribute a minimum of 12 to 15 minutes for our coordination block. If I can, I'll have, so if there's 21 forwards in the gym, 7 will come in for that 12 to 15 minute block at a time, and I can make that either positionally specific or individually specific. So you watch 10 guys run, there might be 3 or 4 guys that have just got horrible ankle stiffness, just completely collapsing into extreme dorsiflexion, no ankle stiffness at all. So those guys might be grouped and they might do some specific work around that, which and then I'll have other guys who are on different targets. So I've done that ever since, is to attribute at least that amount of time. And if I have early morning training, which I generally do in most of my programs, I'll put some of the coordination work in there. But from the influence of Frans, I definitely have gotten better results in speed and agility, but above that, I would rank the reduction in soft tissue. Because, I mean, statistically speaking, having your best players on the field is statistically more potent than, optimizing a 0.1%, of VMAX or Accel or agility. So, we could talk a whole hour on Frans stuff alone. But if you are going to invest in it, it's a big investment, and you've got to take your time and build your skill set out, build the exercises out as you understand them, as you've practiced them. Do his course if you're able to do his course. So I have a lot of people asking me about using his methodologies, and I say, well, it's changed my career for the better. But it was a big investment to get to the point where I can use it, effectively.
Just going, going right back to the start of that Frans Bosch piece that you just articulated very well there. You said about focusing on the things that you know, and if that's where you're at, I think you mentioned the change direction sessions that you put on before you got into the Frans Bosch stuff, and saying that if that's where you are, like focus on that and nail that. What did that actually look like? Just to frame what you were doing before, and then we'll go on to how that's changed. And specifically.
So COD as opposed to agility. So I had 5 meter agility stars, where it's just a simple 5 meter pattern that repeats itself. So you end up running 40 meters of 5 meter segments. We run those fast, and I have timing you in, timing out. So a good guy's going to get 9.8 seconds, a slow person's going to get 12. So I would have just simple little COD, probably 5 or 6 different patterns that we ran regularly. One I call turn and burn, where if I'm facing you, you're 5 meters away from me. There's a pole 5 meters out that way, and if someone calls right or left, you bang out there, then bang back. It's COD, but it's intensity. And then underpinning that is going to be all the strength qualities in the gym, lateral jumps, vertical jumps, wherever I can get metrics on those, I'm going to get metrics on those. If you do that well, and if you do that with intensity and the right volume, you still can make a difference, And if it's a 50-50 call on doing those ones that you can understand and you can control intensity, or something a bit vague, or you're going to swing a ball around your head and do that and take off, stick with what you know. I do encourage people, if they're inclined to invest in his work, because it's brilliant really, and it will lead you to, if you think about you might have a V8 car, but you're driving on flat tyres, and Frans understands the science of those flat tyres and the regions in the body where you can be losing energy. He's got a beautiful Excel template that, up the top there's, general power, and then you've got, ankle stiffness, you've got frontal plane, hip lock, you've got all these different categories where energy might be either optimized or actually lost in any running sprint, be it start and acceleration or agility. So you look across the top here and you're thinking, well, okay, general power is one of those categories, which is the one we all go to, but we could be losing energy at the ankle, we could be losing energy at the hip. The abdominals could simply not be capable of stabilizing the body to allow a dramatic change of direction. And
specifically, when you're looking at ankle stiffness, and you've mentioned that a couple of times, so clearly that's a common issue that you're seeing. How are you training that with the influence of Frans's methodology?
So for starters, I didn't used to train it. I would do sprints. And I didn't really look at the ankle much at all as an area. I mean, and there'll be good sprint coaches who will listen to this and say, "Well, you idiot." It was much less sophisticated at that time. But where it started for me was Eddie selected an ex-rugby league guy called Craig Wing, who's tough rugby league player, very good player, but he must have been 34. And then converted to rugby union. He played 3 or 4 games in 2 seasons. Calf injury, hamstring, calf, hamstring in sequence. Couldn't take the field. Eddie wanted to pick him, and I said, Eddie, the bloke's busted. He hasn't played. And Eddie said, he's tough, mate. I want him. So I got to try and fix him. And first thing, I video him. Side-on video, and Frans looks at it straight away and says, okay, he's collapsing into deep dorsiflexion. There's absolutely no ankle stiffness there. And then, you look at him running at speed. He had quite a few hamstring injuries as well. So I'm nervous because this guy's important to Eddie, and he hasn't done anything above 50% running speed. So Frans gets him on the oval, gets him barefoot. Okay, run as fast as you can and try to overstride. So this guy's barefoot, and I'm shitting myself because I'm thinking, he's going to bust this guy who Eddie wants. Anyway, Frans can speak for himself on the complexities of this stuff. But the first thing was very obvious. If we just look at the ankle, he's completely collapsing in dorsiflexion, deep dorsiflexion. There's no elasticity around the ankle joint whatsoever. So Frans explains to me the difference between, ankle stiffness for start and acceleration, ankle stiffness for top speed. They're a little bit different. So then I have 3 or 4 exercises for ankle stiffness for start and acceleration. So we're doing a lot of work, up steps, some bare feet work, stick on the back, legs switching front and back. It's probably difficult to do without a full video session. But then now I have 3 or 4 exercises in my armory, which I can be done either in the gym setting, so prefabs, ankle stiffness prefabs, start and acceleration. We get to work, and he does 20 minutes of that, and his hamstrings were not strong, So there was no. I mean, really, you guys are all you're either in the Nordic camp or you're in the Bosch camp or you're in the RDL camp. I'm an agnostic. I don't get terribly caught up in all that. But the guy's hamstrings were weak by any stretch. And then you look at his pelvis. His pelvis he's got no control of his pelvis. So at toe off, completely forward collapse of the pelvis. So all of these regions of the body, and he's he's like a little nugget of a bloke. He'd knock your ass over if he tackled you. Strong, but coordination in those key regions. So he's losing energy at the ankle. Hamstrings are weak. He's completely got no control of his pelvis. And so Frans zeroes in on this, teaches me, the prefabs around the ankle, how his approach to hamstring strength, and then the kind of drilling he thinks will connect that hamstring strength to the running gait. Then we look at, ankle stiffness for top speed, which is a little bit different. And then we start building these prefabs, and it's, again, for me, it was pretty crazy looking stuff. But then I start seeing this guy move better and better. And again, to be able to do what Frans said, he said, well, run as fast as you can, barefoot, try and overstride. Well, when you're barefoot, he can explain it probably better than I could, but, the being barefoot and being on grass, your body's, there's a natural probably fear of foot slipping forward, so that all of a sudden you get this swing leg retraction. He's ripping his feet back. I'm seeing this swing leg retraction I've never seen in this guy before. It's not magic like that. It didn't happen in one session, but the process is what is there's no way in the world I would have broken it down. I might have, if I had a look deeper, I might have looked at that video and said, yeah, pretty weak at the ankle, but I wouldn't have then been able to go specifically to the prefabs or the exercises to address that. And that's what his methodology can provide. But it's not. I'm not saying it's the only way, because there are other speed coaches around who might have a very good feel for that stuff. But what Frans also taught me was the concept of positive running, and that is that at toe off, that the pelvis doesn't collapse forward, and that if you develop positive running, there's a net gain there in terms of running speed, but also the capability of being able to shift laterally, really quickly. If the pelvis rocks forward at toe off, you haven't got the preconditions for that. So, on the back of exposure to him, we just built this simple library of stuff that I could deploy on a needs basis. So, for example, we decided to, everyone thought that Japan was really quick, but they're actually not. It's just that we were smaller and zip around. I didn't have much in the way of top speed. So we zeroed in on, for the forwards, just in simple acceleration. So he has templates, so I use the acceleration template for them and an agility template for the backs. So in any strength session, again, we have that 12 to 20 minutes of prefabs, doing all these coordination prefabs. And then we have the main body of our strength. And keep in mind, these are little skinny guys who need to put on 5 kilos of muscle. So we're actually getting up at 5 in the morning and doing 20 minutes of guns, 20 minutes of trap work, So whilst I cop a lot of shit for doing the fancy Bosch stuff, we're also doing huge volumes of hypertrophy. And to do all that without the residual fatigue, I had to kind of microdose everything, microdose the coordination, microdose the hypertrophy. So it's basically that there may be other people around, but for me, Frans introduced a systematic way to improve coordination and to reduce energy loss. And I think that's, I hadn't seen that before, and I haven't seen it, I haven't seen anyone else doing it. But I'm not saying that there isn't. It's just, again, I'd rather stick to a few people I learned from. I learned from Frans, I learned from Warren, I learned from Vern. I would rather stick to that and learn it really well, rather than keep chasing after people who I don't have much exposure to. Because I'm not a quick learner, and I'm certainly not I'm not a quick-minded reader. I can read 10 pages of his book and still think I'm a dumb bastard, But I am, once I get a feel for something, and then I can really add intensity to it. And I think I have 3 words I use if you want to use Frans' exercise: validity, intent, intensity. So validity means if you create an exercise and you're running up with a bag on your back and stopping in position, validity means you need to know what that exercise is relating to. Is it relating to the role of the abdominals in agility? Is it related to, forward rotation of the pelvis and trying to eliminate or reduce that? Is it related to, ankle stiffness and starting? You need to know that. And then you need the intent, and the intensity means I see a lot of athletes, people trying to create Frans exercise, and they'll do this and that. Well, what's the intention of the athlete? They need a clear intention of that movement, where it starts, where it finishes, what a successful outcome is. And there's lots of ways of doing that, but you need to be able to make that clear. And then the third part is intensity. How do you modulate and drive the intensity of those exercises? Is it the speed of movement? So it's either speed pressure, force pressure, or coordination pressure. So that's quite difficult. And that's why I say, build your skill set off Frans stuff very slowly if you're going to do it. Don't just jump on Twitter and someone else has got a lovely hurdle spindle with a halo on top. Do it methodically. But the course is available online now with his stuff if you're interested in that. But for me it gave me a systematic approach to movement efficiency and a systematic approach to agility, which I didn't have before.
I've got one more question for you. I know you've got athletes coming in 5 or 10 minutes, so I'm going to make it reasonably quick. What's the biggest mistakes that you see? Is it one of them 3? Is it all them 3 when you see people, I don't know, swinging things around their head and trying to drive the hip onto a box? Is it the intensity that's missing? Sorry, is it the intent that's missing? Is it the validity in terms of they're just thinking that this links to something when it doesn't and just getting a little bit too ahead of themselves? Is there any specific mistakes that you see?
No, I think it could be any of the 3 that they they don't know which category it fits in, and therefore what are the key points, what are the key rules of execution. And look, just occasionally I'll stumble across some people who have had very limited exposure to him, but who are a hell of a lot smarter than me and who have designed really good stuff on the back of just reading the books and so forth. But for me, that's incomprehensible, because I simply could not get to that point of designing, executing, and controlling quality of those movements without, the in-person exposure, or at least a video library and an explanation. I mean, I probably did a bit of damage, really, because when I was in Japan and having success with those methodologies, I would post stuff, because I was so busy working for Eddie. I'd post stuff, but post it without explanation. Okay. And so I'm just introducing exercises, but not telling anyone exactly. And it looks cool, right? I mean, it looks kind of shiny and new and interesting, and I probably did some damage in, throwing that stuff up and not explaining with those videos, this is what I'm trying to do, and these are the key things that make this either good quality or poor quality. So I don't think that's exclusive to Bosch's methodology. It probably applies to any sort of higher level movement content. But the guys who I've seen, do well without close relationship with Frans, which is an exposure to him, which is a big advantage. Just build out slowly.
Who are the other guys that are nailing this?
Well, you're into
around
football,
the world.
You're into football?
Soccer, yeah, football. Yeah,
I'm calling it football. I'm being respectful. Yeah, Lee Egger, so it's a good example. Lee Egger's a young guy. I don't know what his team is. It's in Belgium and Holland. If you said the name, I'll know. It's one of the big teams in Europe.
Not Feyenoord.
Feyenoord. He's a Feyenoord.
Feyenoord. Yeah, okay.
So I'll give you his story. Lee was probably 12 or 13. His mum sent me to him for send him to me for speed training, and he's naturally the slowest kid I've ever trained, but fit, can run for days, centre back, good smart player, good skill set, good smart player, just too slow. And I used all my traditional speed stuff, and a little bit of improvement, but not that much. And then sadly for him, he got to 18, 19, he did human movement, then did physio, got to his sort of young 20s, and then we started using Bosch methodologies, and his on-field speed, like ability to run this way, looking over his shoulder, trying to mark his attack, those things changed. And there's no way I was going to improve that. And so, he's had that experience, been trained by me since he's 12 or 13, and then had a physical experience with Bosch's stuff, and now lives over there and pretty much is in Bosch's pocket, most weekends when he's not with Feyenoord. So he's excellent. Young guy. If you wanted to drill down into detail on Bosch's stuff and you can't get Frans, then talk to him. Or Toon Thomason is one of, Toon and Paul Venner are his main acolytes. But Lee's good because he's had a physical experience himself.
Okay.
He's a footballer who squeezed the lemon, mate. He squeezed it until there was puffs of smoke coming out. Got every bit of speed out of his body and every bit of power he could muster. And I think talk to him if you're into football and you want someone who's, pushed the traditional methodology as far as possible, then learn Frans' system as an athlete and then learn it as a physio. So he's a young whippersnapper and a bit cocky as all young men are, but he'd be great for you to chat to, mate, because he's now flying at Feyenoord. He's done a couple of interesting, ACLs, rehabs using Frans' methodologies and had guys moving really well at the end of it. So check him out.
Amazing. Cool. Well, I know you've got some athletes coming in, so I'm going to wrap up. But if anyone wants to get in touch with you, JP, is there any? I know you said you're not a big Twitter man from a couple of years ago, but is that somewhere people can get in touch with you? Ask any questions?
I throw a few offerings up on speedpowerplay.com, and we have a YouTube channel in the same name, just Speed Power Play.
Okay.
I don't put much on Twitter because I actually don't feel smart enough to impart my wisdom in 20 characters or whatever the fuck you're allowed to put on Twitter. I think I'll leave that stuff for the Dalai Lama, Yeah. I've Speed Power Play. I'll throw a bit of free stuff up. I'm hoping to put more free stuff up. You can catch me through that. I think on Twitter I'm Fit3K, which is my original business name, and I've got a Speed Power Play account there as well.
Lovely. Well, stick around. I'm just going to have a little brief chat with you afterwards, but I'll let you go. But thank you very much officially for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, and we'll catch up soon.
Pleasure, Rob.
Cheers, JP.